On a desolate moon, the wind howled across barren rocks and cold, empty plains. There was no sign of life, no plants, no animals, just an endless expanse of gray and dust. Among this loneliness, Princess Zalora of the Arathian Empire lay, half-conscious and barely alive. The once proud princess, heir to a mighty empire, was now abandoned, left to die on this distant, forgotten moon. Zalora's skin, a pale shade of blue that was once considered regal in her society, was now streaked with dirt and blood. Her once beautiful face was marred by the cruel deformity that had been the cause of her fall from grace. To the Arathians, beauty was everything. It was a sign of status, power, and purity. But Zalora was born with a twisted face, her features asymmetrical, and her eyes too large. To her people, this was a curse. She was no longer seen as the brilliant and kind princess who once had the potential to lead them to greatness. No, she was an embarrassment to her family. When she was young, her parents, the emperor and empress, had tried to hide her away, hoping no one would notice their daughter's deformity. But the truth came out. The royal court whispered about her, the nobles stared, and the people of the empire turned their backs on her. When Zalora came of age and tried to take her place on the throne, a rival faction in the empire used her appearance against her. They claimed that her ugliness would ruin the reputation of the royal family, and that the Arathians needed someone beautiful to lead them. Her own family turned on her, and the empire betrayed her, casting her out without a second thought. Zalora was left behind on this barren moon, an isolated place far from the empire's reach. Her once glorious palace, full of riches and splendor, felt like a distant dream now. Her last memory of her family was the cold look in her father's eyes as he told her she was no longer welcome. "You are a disgrace," he had said. "You will never rule us." With those words, the Arathian princess had been cast aside, abandoned to die. But Zalora didn't die. She couldn't, not yet. Even though she felt weaker each day, her will to live burned bright. She had managed to survive for weeks, using the small supplies left behind by her would-be assassins. But she was running out of food, and the injury to her leg, caused by a fall, was becoming infected. The pain was constant, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt the most. It was the emotional pain of knowing she had been left to die by her own people. Zalora had long since stopped crying. There were no more tears to shed. She had once dreamed of becoming a leader, someone who would change the Arathian Empire, bring peace to the galaxy, and show that even those who were different had worth. But all of that seemed so far away now. In the cold, harsh reality of this moon, those dreams felt as though they had never existed at all. Her eyes were starting to close when she heard something, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the dust. A soft hum, almost like a whisper of machinery in the distance. She tried to focus, to listen. It wasn't her imagination. Something was out there. For the first time in days, Zalora gathered the strength to sit up. Her body screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She had to know what it was. The sound grew louder, and soon she saw it. A small spacecraft descending toward the surface of the moon. It was human-made. She recognized the design, having seen it in the Imperial archives. Humans had once been allies to the Arathian Empire, before tensions had driven them apart. The humans were not known for their beauty, and their technology wasn't as advanced as the Arathians, but they were resilient and resourceful. The ship landed in a plume of dust. A hatch opened, and a figure stepped out. It was a human, a man, wearing the simple uniform of a medic, not a soldier. He looked down at the barren landscape, scanning the area, as though he knew something was wrong. He must have been searching for someone. But who? Zalora tried to call out, but her throat was dry, and the words caught in her chest. Her body refused to move any further. She collapsed back onto the cold ground, her vision blurry as the man approached. "Hey, are you all right?" the human asked, his voice kind and urgent. He knelt beside her, his hand gentle as he reached out to check her pulse. "You're alive, barely." Zalora wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She wanted to tell him everything. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness. But all she could do was stare at the human. For the first time in a long while, someone was showing concern. Someone was here to help her. The medic's name was Ethan Cole, a human who had seen countless worlds and helped countless people. But he had never seen someone like Zalora. To him, she was just another life to save, another soul who needed care. She may have been abandoned, left to die. But to Ethan, she was worth saving. Ethan Cole had been on many missions. As a medic in the Human Medical Corps, he had traveled to war-torn planets, disaster zones, and places where few dared to go. His job was simple: save lives. No matter who the person was or where they came from, he was there to help. But today, on this barren moon, he had no idea that he was about to encounter something that would change his life forever. When Ethan had received the distress signal, his team had been skeptical. The lone signal from a remote, uninhabited moon, thousands of light years from any human colonies. They thought it was a malfunction, a glitch in the system. But Ethan, ever the optimist, had insisted on responding. "We don't leave anyone behind," he had said. And so, they had come. The landing had been rough, as the ship had to navigate through dust storms and uneven terrain. But as soon as the ship's landing gears touched the ground, Ethan felt a sense of urgency. He could feel it in his gut, the kind of feeling he had learned to trust after years of experience. He stepped out of the ship, scanning the landscape. There was nothing but endless gray dust and jagged rocks as far as the eye could see. The air was thin, and the sky was an endless expanse of black, dotted with distant stars. It was a cold, lonely place. Ethan wondered what had brought someone here, who had sent the distress signal, and why. As he moved forward, his eyes caught something in the distance, a figure. At first, he thought it was just another rock or pile of debris, but then the figure shifted. It was a person, a woman, lying on the ground. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He ran toward her without hesitation. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. The woman was barely conscious, her face pale and covered in dirt. Her skin was a strange shade of blue, unlike anything he had ever seen. Her hair, tangled and wild, was a silvery gray, adding to the strange beauty of her appearance. But it wasn't her appearance that made Ethan's heart tighten. It was the sheer fragility of her labored breathing, her thin frame, the cuts and bruises scattered across her body. He gently checked her pulse, feeling the weak, erratic beat beneath his fingertips. She was alive, but barely. He quickly reached into his medical pack, pulling out a small injector filled with antibiotics and a painkiller. He administered the shot and began assessing her injuries, noticing the deep gash on her leg and the infection that had already begun to set in. As he worked, he tried to speak to her. "Hey, you're going to be okay. I'm here to help you." But she didn't respond. Her eyes were glazed, her lips cracked and dry. Ethan glanced up at the sky, wondering who had left her here to die. Was she a prisoner? An enemy? But as he looked at her more closely, he saw something in her eyes, a sadness, a fear, that made him question everything he had assumed. She wasn't just some stranded survivor. There was more to her story. Once he had stabilized her, he carefully lifted her into his arms, carrying her back to the ship. He couldn't leave her here. He had to get her somewhere safe. As he carried her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The situation didn't make sense. Inside the ship, Ethan laid her on one of the medical beds and began to clean and dress her wounds. He hooked her up to an IV and monitored her vitals as best he could. Slowly, the color began to return to her face, but she remained unconscious. Ethan sat beside her, waiting for her to wake up. As he sat there, he wondered who she was and why she had been left alone on this cold, empty moon. She couldn't have been here by accident. Someone had abandoned her, and that thought filled him with anger. Hours passed before she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around, disoriented. When her gaze fell on Ethan, she tensed, as though she were ready to flee. But Ethan quickly held up his hands, signaling that he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." She looked at him, confusion clouding her eyes. Slowly, she sat up, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a medic," he replied. "I came to help you." For a moment, the woman said nothing, studying him with suspicion. Ethan could see the hesitation in her eyes, the fear. She had clearly been through a lot. "Why? Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice soft, but full of pain. Ethan was taken aback by her question. "Because everyone deserves help," he said, shrugging, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "It doesn't matter who you are. You needed it, and I was here." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. I'm not worth saving." Ethan felt his heart ache as he saw the deep sadness in her eyes. "No one is ever beyond saving," he said, his voice firm. "You're worth saving. You're worth more than you know." The woman looked down, her expression troubled. "I don't think anyone else believes that." "I do," Ethan said, his voice full of conviction. "And I'm going to help you." Zalora had never expected anyone to care. She had spent her life hearing harsh words, feeling the sting of rejection, and learning that kindness was a rare and fleeting thing. But now, as she sat on the medical bed in the small human ship, staring at the man who had saved her, she was beginning to wonder if maybe she had been wrong. Maybe there was more to the universe than the cruelty she had known. Ethan Cole sat across from her, his eyes steady, watching her with a mixture of concern and kindness. He had been caring for her ever since he found her on the moon, tending to her injuries, keeping her alive when she had almost given up. His calm presence made Zalora feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. As she looked at him, she realized that she hadn't even asked him about himself. The only thing that mattered to her before was whether she would survive. Now she needed to understand who this human was and why he had helped her. "What do you want from me?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was hoarse, and even she could hear the fear beneath the words. Ethan blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? Why did you help me?" Zalora repeated, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not worth saving. I don't deserve it." Ethan shook his head. "That's not true. No one is beyond help, not even you." Zalora's eyes filled with confusion and pain. She had spent her whole life being told she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. She had been rejected by her family, by her people, and by the very society she had once tried to help. To hear someone say she was worth saving felt like a strange dream she didn't deserve to wake up from. "Why don't you go back to your people?" she asked quietly. "Why waste your time on me?" Ethan looked at her, his expression soft but firm. "Because I don't believe anyone should be left behind, no matter what they look like or where they come from." Zalora felt a rush of emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever seen her as anything other than a disgrace. And yet, here was this human, treating her with dignity, as though she mattered. She didn't know what to say to that. She looked out of the small window of the ship, seeing the cold emptiness of the moon's surface. It was hard to believe that someone like Ethan existed in the galaxy, a person who didn't judge her by her appearance, who didn't see her as a failure or a burden. In fact, he seemed to see her as something much more. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "We're heading back to my cruise ship," Ethan replied. "I'll make sure you're fully healed. Once you're stable, we'll figure out what to do next." Zalora felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. Could it be possible that she could start over? Could she leave her past behind and become someone who wasn't defined by her appearance or the cruelty of her people? But doubt crept in again. "I don't think I can go back to my people," she said, her voice low. "They've cast me out. They'll never accept me again." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes steady. Then maybe it's time to find a new path. One that doesn't involve them. Zelora's heart pounded in her chest. The thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying. Her entire life had been tied to the Arathian Empire, its people, its traditions, its expectations. But now, here she was, on a human ship, with someone who saw her as more than just an ugly princess. Zelora wanted to believe it, to believe that she could start again. But she couldn't shake the fear that she was still nothing, still just a mistake in the eyes of her family and her people. "Why do you believe in me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his expression calm but full of warmth. "Because I don't believe in judging someone by how they look. You've been through more than most people can imagine, but that doesn't make you any less worthy. You're still alive, and you still have the chance to make a difference. You just need to believe in yourself." Zelora was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Could it really be that simple? Could someone as broken as her actually have a chance to make a difference? A small part of her wanted to hope. She wanted to believe in what Ethan was saying, to believe that she could be more than the discarded princess of a dying empire. But the scars on her heart, the years of rejection, told her that hope was a dangerous thing. Hope only led to disappointment. But then Ethan spoke again, his voice gentle but determined. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to fight this battle by yourself." Zelora looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, a future. Not one shaped by the cruel standards of her people, but one of her own making. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a small spark of hope. Ethan smiled, a simple and reassuring gesture. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do." But Zelora knew that wasn't true. He wasn't just anyone. Ethan had given her something no one else ever had, the chance to rebuild her life, to find a purpose beyond her appearance, and to find a place where she belonged. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. The days passed slowly aboard the small human ship. Zelora spent most of her time recovering, lying in the medical bed, allowing Ethan to treat her wounds and monitor her health. As her body healed, so did something deep inside her, a faint flicker of hope that she hadn't felt in years. She still wasn't sure about her future, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. Ethan was always there, whether he was checking her vitals, talking to her in a calm voice, or simply sitting in silence. His presence gave her a sense of safety, something she had lost long ago. But as the days turned into weeks, a new question began to form in her mind. What was she going to do now? She couldn't return to the Arathian Empire. That much was clear. They had rejected her, and if she ever showed her face there again, she would be seen as a traitor, a reminder of their failure. But could she really stay with these humans? Could she become part of their world, leave everything behind, and start over? Zelora wasn't sure she was ready to make that choice. It felt like too much, too fast. The memories of her past still haunted her. Her father's cold eyes, the whispers behind her back, the endless disappointment. She had been raised to be the perfect princess, to rule with grace and beauty, but now she was nothing more than a broken, abandoned woman. Could she ever be more than that? One evening, as the ship coasted through the endless stretch of space, Ethan sat beside her in the small common area. Zelora had been staring out the window, watching the stars pass by, when he spoke softly. "We're approaching a new system, a place called Olvera. There's a medical station there, one of the biggest in the region. It might be able to offer some treatments and resources you haven't had access to before." Zelora looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked again, her voice full of the same doubt she had felt since their first encounter. "You could leave me there. You don't have to keep me around." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Because I believe you deserve more than to be abandoned on a dead moon. You have potential, Zelora. I see it. I know you don't believe it right now, but you don't have to live in the shadows of your past forever." His words pierced through the layers of pain she had built around herself. She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. "I don't know how to move forward. I've been nothing but a disappointment to everyone I've ever known." Ethan shook his head. "You weren't a disappointment. Your people, your family, maybe they were the ones who failed you. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It just means that you don't belong there anymore." Zalora was silent, her mind racing. Could Ethan be right? Could she leave behind the person she had been, the rejected princess, and create a new life for herself? As they neared the Olvera system, a mixture of fear and excitement settled inside her. She didn't know what she wanted anymore, but one thing was certain. She couldn't keep running from her past forever. It was time to make a decision. "I don't know what to do," she admitted quietly. "I don't know where to go or how to start over." Ethan smiled gently, his voice reassuring. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to take it one step at a time. And wherever you go, I'll be here to help you." His words were simple, but they filled her with warmth. For the first time, Zalora realized that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. There were people in the galaxy who would help her, people who saw her worth beyond the surface, beyond the imperfections. It was a small but important realization. For the first time in years, she felt like there might be a chance for her to build something new. Later that evening, the ship docked at the Olvera Medical Station. The station was a massive structure, filled with advanced technology, bright lights, and bustling medical professionals. As they disembarked, Zalora felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. This place felt so different from everything she had known. There were no royal halls, no grand ceremonies, no judgmental eyes watching her. Here, she was just another person in need of care. Ethan led her through the sterile halls of the medical station, where they were greeted by a team of doctors and nurses who immediately went to work on her treatment. The facility was clean, efficient, and full of people who were only concerned with one thing: helping others. Zalora had never experienced anything like it. The medical staff treated her like a patient, not a princess. They didn't care about her past, her appearance, or the empire she came from. They just wanted to make her better. It was a strange feeling, being cared for without any expectations or conditions. As she lay in one of the treatment rooms, waiting for the doctors to finish their scans and tests, Zalora found herself alone for a moment. The silence was peaceful, but her mind was filled with questions. What would her future look like? Could she truly leave everything behind and start over without the weight of her past holding her back? As she stared out the window of the medical station, watching the stars drift by, a thought crossed her mind. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she had been told she was. Maybe she could find her place in the universe, and maybe, just maybe, she could find peace. The days at the Olvera Medical Station passed quickly for Zalora. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to help her, running scans and providing treatments that she had never experienced before. Each day, she felt a little stronger, her wounds healing and her mind becoming less clouded. For the first time in months, she felt like she was in control of her life again. But despite the progress, one question still lingered in her mind. What now? Ethan was always by her side, checking in on her progress and making sure she was comfortable. But lately, he had been more distant. He wasn't as talkative as before, and Zalora couldn't help but notice the concern in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for her to make a decision, to choose a path, but he wasn't pushing her. She could tell that he cared for her, but it was hard for her to accept. She wasn't used to being cared for, let alone cared for by someone like him, a human. Her mind was still clouded by the memories of her past, the sting of rejection, and the weight of her family's expectations. It felt like a heavy chain around her neck, pulling her back every time she tried to take a step forward. One evening, after a long day of tests, Zalora found herself alone in the medical station's garden. The stars shone brightly above, and the gentle hum of the station's systems created a peaceful atmosphere. She sat on a bench, her hands folded in her lap, staring out into the distance. She had come here to think, to clear her mind. But as she sat there, she realized that the decision she had been avoiding for so long was now staring her in the face. She had to choose. She couldn't stay in limbo forever. Footsteps behind her broke her concentration, and she turned to find Ethan standing there, looking down at her with a gentle expression. His dark eyes seemed to search her face, looking for something, perhaps an answer. "Zalora," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "How are you feeling?" Zalora didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her still wanted to run, to hide from the reality of what her life had become. But another part of her, the part that had started to heal in the past few weeks, knew that running wasn't the answer. "I'm better," she said finally, her voice a little shaky. "Physically, I feel stronger. But emotionally, I don't know what to do anymore, Ethan." Ethan sat down beside her, his presence warm and comforting. "You don't have to figure everything out all at once. You've been through a lot. It's okay to take your time." Zalora nodded, her eyes focused on the stars above. She felt a knot tighten in her chest as she spoke, her words coming out in a quiet whisper. "I don't know if I can ever go back to my people. They'll never accept me. They see me as a failure, a mistake." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "Then maybe it's time to leave them behind. You don't owe them anything, Zalora. You have the right to choose your own path, to decide who you want to be. And if you want to move forward, then you need to start by letting go of the past." Zalora looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But what if I don't know who I am without them? I've spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations. If I leave all of that behind, who am I then?" Ethan gave her a small smile. "You're Zalora, a woman with a past, yes, but also someone with a future. The past doesn't define you. It's just a part of your story, not the whole story. You have the chance to make your own choices now." Zalora's heart raced as his words sank in. For so long, she had felt trapped in the shadow of her past, like she was always running away from who she used to be. But maybe Ethan was right. Maybe the only way to truly move forward was to let go of the weight of her family's expectations and step into the unknown. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm not strong enough to do this?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression full of understanding. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Zalora. No one is. You just have to keep going, one step at a time. And I'll be here to help you, no matter what you decide." Zalora felt a surge of warmth in her chest. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as strong as it had been before. She had spent so long running from the truth that she hadn't realized how much strength she had within her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and face the future head-on. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice steady now. "I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I can't keep living in the past. I'm going to find my own path. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'll figure it out." Ethan smiled, a proud and supportive smile that made Zalora feel like she had made the right choice. "That's all anyone can do, and you're not alone in this." Zalora stood up, taking a deep breath as she looked out at the stars once more. She was no longer the abandoned princess of the Arathian Empire. She was Zalora, a woman with the power to choose her own future. And for the first time in a long time, she felt hope, true hope, for the road ahead. Zalora's decision to move forward was not an easy one. Each day, the weight of her past still clung to her, like a shadow that refused to leave. But she knew one thing for sure. She could not keep running from who she was. With Ethan's support, she was beginning to realize that there was more to her future than the mistakes of her past. After a week of recovery at the Ulvera medical station, Zalora stood on the observation deck of the station, gazing out at the stars. The vastness of space was both beautiful and terrifying. She was small, insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an outcast. She felt like she had the chance to make a difference, to decide what kind of life she wanted to have. Ethan had been by her side every step of the way, always offering a listening ear and kind words. But now, as the station's hum filled the air, Zalora knew it was time to make a choice, one that could change everything. She turned to Ethan, who was standing beside her, watching the stars as well. His presence had been a steady anchor for her. She had never met anyone like him, a human who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past few weeks, but now Zalora had to decide what to do next. "I've been thinking," Zalora said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "I can't stay here. I can't keep running from the past. But I'm not sure what to do." Ethan turned to face her, his dark eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Whatever you decide, I'll be with you." Zalora nodded, her fingers gripping the railing of the observation deck. She had spent so long trapped by the expectations of her family and her people that she didn't know what freedom felt like. But in the few weeks she had spent with the humans, she had learned something important. Freedom wasn't just about escaping. It was about choosing your own path, without the weight of others' expectations. "I've been thinking about the humans, about you, and about what kind of future I could have with you," Zalora continued, her voice hesitant but gaining strength. "Maybe it's time I left everything behind. Maybe I need to leave my past behind." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but he didn't speak. He just waited, letting Zalora find her own words. "I know I can't go back to my people. They'll never accept me. And even if they did, I don't think I could live like I did before," Zalora said, her eyes distant as she spoke. "But I also know that I can't stay here forever. I need to find something to do, something to fight for." Ethan nodded, a soft smile forming on his lips. "I think you've already started. You've been through so much, Zalora. You've survived things most people couldn't even imagine. You've already shown more strength than you know." Zalora felt a spark of hope in her chest. She had spent so much of her life seeing herself as a failure, but Ethan's words made her realize something. She had the strength to rebuild her life, to find a new purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but that didn't mean it wasn't worth taking. "So, what do you want to do?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle but serious. Zalora took a deep breath. "I don't know yet, but I want to help. I've been trained to lead, to heal, to protect. Maybe I can use those skills in a way that actually makes a difference, instead of just serving the people who rejected me." Ethan's expression softened. "You could make a huge difference, Zalora. There's so much more to you than what your past says. You don't have to follow anyone's rules but your own." Zalora smiled, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. "I think I'd want to join your crew. You said before that you're helping people. Maybe I could do that too. Maybe I could use my skills to help others, people who don't judge me for who I am." Ethan's eyes lit up with surprise and pride. "I think that's a great idea. We could use someone like you on board. You'd fit right in." Zalora felt a warmth in her chest at his words. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a burden, that she had something valuable to offer. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to try. I'm ready to be something more than what I've been." Ethan smiled at her, his eyes full of support and understanding. "You're already more than you think, Zalora. You just need to believe in yourself." Zalora took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past lift just a little. She had made a decision. She was going to move forward, not as the abandoned princess, but as someone who could choose her own destiny. She didn't know exactly what that future looked like, but she knew it was hers to create. As the stars continued to shine brightly above the station, Zalora felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And with Ethan by her side, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. Zalora stood on the bridge of the human ship, gazing out at the stars that stretched across the vastness of space. The ship hummed quietly beneath her feet, a gentle reminder that this was no longer her past life. She wasn't the abandoned princess of the Arathian Empire anymore. Now she was part of something new, a crew of people who saw her for who she was, not for her royal blood or the mistakes of her past. It had been weeks since she made the decision to leave her old life behind. With Ethan's support, she had begun training with the crew, learning their ways and offering her skills wherever she could. She had always been skilled in medicine, but she had also learned much from the humans, how they treated each other with kindness, how they valued each person for what they could contribute. It was a far cry from the world she had come from. Zalora had quickly become an important part of the crew. Her knowledge of healing and strategy had proved useful on several occasions, but it was her compassion that truly stood out. She treated every person with respect, no matter their rank or background. It was something she had never experienced before. In her old life, only those of royal blood mattered. Now, every individual was important. But even as Zalora grew stronger and more confident in her new role, there was still a part of her that struggled with self-doubt. She had spent so much of her life believing that she wasn't good enough, that her worth was tied to her family's expectations. The old wounds were still there, deep within her, but every day they seemed to hurt a little less. One day, as she was finishing up her shift in the medical bay, Ethan came to find her. He was smiling, a rare expression that always seemed to make her heart race. He was carrying a small, folded piece of paper in his hand. "Hey, Zalora," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've got something for you." Zalora raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it?" Ethan handed her the piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, scanning the words written on it. It was a letter of recommendation from the captain of the ship, a formal request for Zalora to join the crew as a full member. The captain had written about her dedication, her skills, and most importantly, her heart. The letter ended with a simple statement: "You're one of us now." Zalora stared at the paper in shock. She had never imagined something like this, especially after everything that had happened. For so long, she had felt like an outsider, even among the humans. But this was different. She had earned her place on this ship, and now they'd wanted her to stay. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Ethan smiled warmly. "You don't have to say anything. You've already shown what you're capable of. This is just a piece of paper, but it means you're part of this crew now, officially." Zalora felt a tear slip down her cheek, a tear of relief, of joy. It wasn't the first time she had cried since leaving her old life behind, but it was the first time she had cried tears of hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered, shaking her head. "I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt people, and I've been hurt." Ethan stepped forward, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're human, Zalora. We all make mistakes. It's what you do after that matters. And I've seen what you're doing. You're making a difference, not just here, but in yourself. That's what counts." Zalora took a deep breath, wiping her tears away. "I never thought I'd be here, with people who care about me. I never thought I could be part of something that actually makes a difference." Ethan's smile grew wider. "You are making a difference, every day. And now, you're part of something that's bigger than any one of us." Zalora nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of pride. It wasn't the life she had expected, but it was the life she had chosen. A life where she could make her own decisions, where she could heal others, and where she could prove to herself that she was worthy of love and respect, no matter her past. As the ship moved through the stars, Zalora looked out at the endless stretch of space. There was so much to see, so much to experience, and she was no longer afraid. She had found her place among the humans, and she had found something else, too: peace. For the first time in a long time, she was at peace with who she was. The past no longer defined her. It was the choices she made now, the actions she took, that mattered. And with every step forward, she was creating a future that was all her own. Ethan stepped beside her, looking out at the stars as well. "Where do you want to go next?" he asked. Zalora smiled, a new sense of purpose in her eyes. "Anywhere, everywhere. The galaxy is vast, and I've only just begun." With that, the ship continued its journey through the stars, carrying Zalora to a future that was full of possibilities. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready for whatever came next.